learn to trust those if you leave them hanging.
Wait! Hold it! Changing everything. We are flipping the script. The last thing our relationships are comprised of is commitment.
Wait, didn't we say in our intro video that relationships were built on trust, understanding, and love? You just said commitment.
Yeah, we did that. The whole flip the script thing. You were there for that.
I mean, sure, yeah, but we only promised them 4 videos, and love seems pretty important.
I changed my mind, commitment is lit, and I have beef with the word love.
You have beef with the word love?
Is this because you're single?
Ooh, got him.
What? No, I beef with the word, not the concept.
It's because you're single.
Commitment is the container in which a relationship exists. I don't have to convince you that in order to form a relationship, 2 or more individuals have to exist in the same space, do life together. If you don't commit to showing up day after day, there will be no relationship. How can you come to understand someone or learn to trust them if you leave them hanging or stand her up for the date, blow them off at the bar, don't respond to their texts? If 2 people aren't mutually present, there is no relationship. We all know this, right? Like, this isn't news. To build relationship, you have to be there. I'm just making this very clear because based on personal experience, I find it very helpful to all be on the same page on this one.
You have to successfully make specific plans. You have to successfully get into your car, and you have to successfully arrive to be in each other's presence. If you consistently do not show up, whether you mean to say it or not, what you are actually saying is, I don't want to be in a relationship with you. We're all good there? Okay? I can keep going. No? All right.
There are 2 kinds of commitment that we experience, and interestingly, both are essential to storytelling. We define them as situational commitment and intentional commitment.
Situational commitment is a context that forces 2 or more individuals to be together outside of their control. Throughout our childhood, most of our friendships begin and are maintained because of this kind of commitment. Things like church or camp, and most likely going to school.
John and I rode the same bus to school every day. This was not our choice. The government forced us to go to school, and because our parents lived close to each other and could not drive us themselves, we were on that bus every morning and every evening. And because we were in that same space 5 days a week for at least an hour, we began to get to know each other and subsequently establish some trust and understanding.
But it wasn't necessarily hard for us to maintain a relationship. If we had a disagreement, I'd see him the next day, and the next day, and the next day.
Hello?
And the next day, and the next day. So ultimately, we were forced to show up every day and observe the nuances in each other's humanity, to be challenged by our differences, and grow to understand each other much deeper. Because of this situational commitment, we had no option to just quit.
Likewise, most stories start this way. Lightning McQueen is forced to stay in Radiator Springs because of his sentence, and because of this, he starts to get to know the residents of Radiator Springs, namely Sally, Mater, and Doc. Judy blackmails Nick because of his lead. Because of that, they start to get to know each other. Aladdin controls the lamp, forcing Genie to stick around. Rapunzel steals the crown, forcing Flynn to help her get to the lights.
Toothless broke his fin and can't fly away. Jewel and Blue are chained together. Baymax senses Hero's depression and won't leave until he's cured. Mike and Sully both get kicked out of the scare program. Ralph needs the medal from Vanellope. Felix and Calhoun need to find Ralph. I can go on. I'd wager that most stories that involve 2 characters meeting and forming a relationship start because of some plot device that forces them together beyond their control.
But the problem with situational commitment is it's superficial. It doesn't inherently tell us anything about the relationship, how close they are, or even if they're friends at all. There are plenty of other kids who rode our bus who were friendly acquaintances, but it didn't go any deeper than that. What really creates close relationships and turns acquaintances into friends is intentional commitment. Sally fills Lightning up with gas, taking a leap of faith, trusting that the relationship they've formed is more meaningful to Lightning than getting back to racing, which has thus far been his entire life, his greatest concern, his identity. Realizing the opportunity he's been presented with, he looks off in the distance, weighs his options, and rather than doing the only thing he's wanted to do since we've met him, he commits.
Judy just got fired. The investigation is over. This is Nick's chance. He can finally get back to his life of swindling, where he understands everything he needs to know about people. But even though he's only created inconveniences that get in the way of solving the case on time, he doesn't take advantage of the opportunity. Rather, he steps in and says the relationship that I've formed with Judy is more important than my own wants and needs. He commits.
In Enchanted, Robert has had enough. Giselle has become too much of a burden, so he gives her money and sends her on her way. Now he can get back to his life as it always has been, repair and maintain his job, smooth things over with Nancy, and get back to his wants and needs. But instead, for the sake of the relationship that they've built up to this point, he commits.
Intentional commitment is a motivated decision. It's when one character demonstrates through acts of service and fulfilled promises that the relationship she has with another is more important than her own personal wants, needs, and desires. And thus, we've arrived. This is it. This is the core. The realization of intentional commitment defines every successful relationship you've ever been a part of. In contrast, when one or both parties demonstrate that they care more about themselves than the relationship, this will define every unsuccessful relationship you've ever been a part of.
And as Pete Docter says, what we find impactful in story is character change through relationship.
It's watching a character grow and change, and what changes people in real life? Other people.
This is good story. Why this is good story is a matter of philosophical debate, and I'd be glad to let you in on my thoughts another time. But suffice it to say, as W.H. Auden puts it when discussing the commitment of marriage, everything which is not the involuntary result of fleeting emotion, but the creation of time and will, is infinitely more interesting than any romance, however passionate. Anything you create out of time and will is far more interesting than anything created on a whim emotion.
A relationship that persists through a long, hard season of distrust is far more interesting than your first kiss. Two old friends who make it a weekly priority to converse and chat is more interesting than a famous person liking your tweet. So how do we write characters that demonstrate these moments of intentional commitment? What are those comprised of?
So, if intentional commitment is two individuals valuing their relationship more than their own personal wants and needs, how do we see that play out? Change. We change to make relationships work. Nick changed to become more honest and selfless to help Judy. Lightning McQueen became more aware, gracious, receptive, and selfless to grow his relationship with Sally, Mater, and Doc. You're gonna see a trend with this selfless thing. There are two ways we express change through relationship: fulfilled promises and acts of service.
Lewis Speed says, "When I make a promise, I bear witness that my future with you is not locked into a bionic beam by which I was stuck with the fateful combinations of X's and Y's in the hand I was dealt out of my parents' genetic deck. When I make a promise, I testify that I was not routed along some unalterable itinerary by the psychic conditioning visited upon me by my slightly wacky parents. When I make a promise, I declare that my future with people who depend on me is not predetermined by the mixed-up culture of my tender years. I am not fated, I am not determined. I am not a lump of human dough whipped into shape by the contingent reinforcement and adverse conditioning of my past. When I make a promise to anyone, I rise above all the conditioning that limits me. No German shepherd ever promised to be there with me. No home computer ever promised to be a loyal help. Only a person can make a promise, and when he does, he is most free."
You okay?
TLDR, when you make a promise, you are defining who you are trying to be. And now, you're accountable to that.
Promises inherently ask for change. In other words, you don't make promises for who you tend to be. For instance, if I tell someone, I promise I'm going to go to work tomorrow, they're going to be confused. They're going to be like, wait, were you not going to go to work anyway? But if I'm not the kind of person to take out the trash, and one day I promise my roommate, I'll take it out as soon as it gets full, I promise. All of a sudden I've made a declaration of character change. But why? I don't want to spend the time or energy to take out the trash when he'll do it anyway. But maybe it's not about the trash. What if it's about the relationship? Maybe growing and maintaining the relationship with my roommate is way more important than my personal want not to take out the trash. And in making that promise, I'm ultimately responsible for the fulfillment of that promise, ultimately showing how much I care about that relationship and how much I'm willing to change for the sake of the relationship.
Aladdin and Genie's relationship first begins when Aladdin promises to set Genie free. Aladdin, putting his identity on the line, is telling Genie that their future relationship is more important than that third wish. Lightning McQueen is called out by Sally when he flippantly promises Mater a helicopter ride.
Did you mean it?
Forcing Lightning to consider how important these relationships are to him, and whether or not he would change for their sake.
And the magnitude of change our promises claim give light to how important those relationships are to us, aka how close we are. I might promise a neighbor to grab their mail while they're gone, and while my neighbor will appreciate me doing that, and my fulfillment of that promise will surely grow her trust in me and ultimately our relationship, the degree of change for me is minimal. All I have to do is grab it on the way in. Takes 5 minutes. So it doesn't really indicate a deep relationship between us. What if my sister is rushed to the hospital and I promise to take care of my nieces and nephews for an entire week? What does that say about how close we are? Or what if I break that promise? How does that impact our relationship?
And then there's the most extreme example, marriage. Have you ever really thought about what marriage is? It's a promise, a legally binding covenant where two people stand in front of a bunch of witnesses and say, if we're rich, I'm gonna be there. If we're dirt poor, look by your side. I'm there. When you feel great, I'm here. And when you're bedridden for a month, knock knock, who's there? It's your best friend Stewie. I'm always gonna be there for you. When things are easy, I'm gonna be right by your side. And when you suck and you're being super selfish and you're not loving me at all, I'm gonna stay. And to varying degrees, that's what every promise you make is saying. Whatever face it takes, you're telling that other person that I'm going to be there for you. Even when you suck, or even when you're at your most broken, I won't leave.
And because of that, a promise creates safety. As Tim Keller puts it, it creates a cradle of security for your vulnerability. It makes it possible to say, here's who I am, and here's what's wrong.
A promise creates freedom, because rather than your identity being determined by default reactions to the stimuli around you, you're taking control of your life and saying, this is who I am. Let me prove it.
And lastly, a promise creates a confirmation of worth. When you make a promise to someone, you're saying you're worth changing for.
While making a promise is the verbal declaration that you value a relationship more than your own wants and needs, serving is the action. What I find most profound about relationships is that they're necessarily built on selflessness from both parties. If either person is taken advantage of, misunderstood, not heard, or not considered, the relationship doesn't go that deep. Which is nuts. It's not just a good suggestion. If you want to be in a deep, safe, and meaningful relationship, it's a law.
Like, take the popular girl-satellite relationship. I know this isn't a great example, but hopefully you're tracking. Do you think Veronica feels safe to tell Trixie Tang, this is who I am and this is what's wrong, without the fear of Trixie leaving the relationship? I know this is a silly example, but what about in contrast to Wanda and Timmy? Timmy is a mess, but Wanda and him are so close, she stays.
We put up with a lot of your selfishness because we love you and we're friends.
Wanda cares about the relationship with Timmy more so than her pride, or I don't know, sanity. The point is, in the satellite trope, the satellite isn't made to feel heard or considered. So the relationship is built on a sense of dependency rather than safety, and therefore the relationship is pretty shallow. What this means for us and our characters is that in order to grow and engage in the deepest of friendships, we have to constantly die to our pride and our individualism for the sake of the person across from us.
And this action doesn't have to be as grandiose as, say, I don't know, cutting the hair that would otherwise save you in order to prevent the one you love from having to endure a lifetime of slavery. Taking on a posture of serving includes any action that you take where you put the needs of the other before yourself. For example, listening and considering, showing genuine interest in what the other person's talking about by asking questions, committing random facts about their life to memory, and showing up, sacrificing for the relationship. All these things are seemingly very small, but they can have a huge impact on the way you and your characters develop relationships.
So imagine this situation. Carey and Kate meet at a wedding and they talk for like an hour or something. The two of them really hit it off and they have a lot in common. Carey is really excited about this new potential friend. A couple weeks later, they run into each other at the grocery store, and Carey says, "Hey, Kate!" And Kate responds with, "Hey, Terry?" Conversely, what if when they ran into each other, Kate said, "Hey, Carey!"
Just showing that Kate cared enough about the relationship to remember Carey's name shows us that they are so much closer in the second example. I remember this one time at my last job, I was chatting with one of my coworkers, Dustin. And typically my coworkers weren't too concerned with who each other was outside of work. However, one day, John's mom had come in, and I already told Dustin another day, that was John's mom. I assumed that he had not committed that to memory, so I just mentioned, that's my best friend's mom. He looked me right in the eye and he said, I know. I swear our relationship grew 2 sizes that day, just because that small piece of me was now a part of him. And in that teeny tiny way, Dustin was willing to change for the sake of our relationship.
In Tangled, the growth of Rapunzel and Flynn's relationship is seen through many of these small moments. After Rapunzel's montage of excitement and lament from leaving the tower, Flynn admits that he was listening to her and piecing some of her life together. Similarly, when they're escaping in the underground tunnel, there's this nice little moment where the two of them are genuinely becoming interested in the other's life.
What's interesting is they don't really learn much about each other through these conversations. The fact that they're asking about each other's lives, listening to the other, considering what that means for the other, and remembering those details, creates a sense of growth for their relationship. So much so that by the time they're trapped in a cave, their vulnerable confessions serve to further build trust rather than be just some random factoid. Like if it's just 2 random people who have never met in this cave, and then one of them was like, hey, my name is Eugene. The other was like, cool. That's interesting. But because of those earlier moments, their confessions have further implications of trust and understanding. And the culmination and consistency of these small acts of service also define the depth of our relationships. But whereas these small sacrifices are expected in all our relationships, the ultimate catalyst for deep friendship is perseverance in conflict.
There is a clear difference between close acquaintances and close friends. Girlfriend of a year, wife of 10. What happens when the waters get rough? What happens when your best friend questions the morality of your politics? When your husband becomes more of a roommate because he's always physically and mentally at work? When expectations aren't met because of a misunderstanding of core values? When your nephew, who's like a son to you, betrays you and throws you in jail, and then while you're sitting there he calls you this worthless, crazy old man? What do? Do you seek revenge, or do you forgive him unconditionally?
What about when you realize that you've been self-centered and you are responsible for the detriment of your relationships? Do you keep your pride, or do you seek active change? Do you admit to your family that you've been so obsessed with being a hero that you've undervalued them? Or do you continue to prove your value through hero work? This is what's so great about The Incredibles. The whole movie is this whole discussion on commitment. Bob put his identity in being valued as a hero. But from the very beginning, Helen tells him at their wedding, if we're gonna make this work, you're gonna have to be more than Mr. Incredible. You know that, right? Conflict of the movie. He fails on that commitment. In light of having his identity compromised, he pursues proving himself over his relationship with his family, until realizing that that relationship is everything to him by losing them, forcing him to seek character change for the sake of his family. As Bob continues to struggle with self versus family, Helen is forced to remind him of their vows.
Not a chance. You're my husband, I'm with you. For better or worse. If we work together, you won't have to be.
This is a relationship. We do this together.
Hey, that just sounds a lot like love. If there's one thing that Frozen deserves credit for, it's the fact that they at least got the definition of love right. I mean, we do understand that love requires sacrifice, right? When Flynn cuts Rapunzel's hair, that's love. When Anna sacrifices for Elsa, Bing Bong for Riley. I mean, these are literally the most extreme examples. But we do understand that love requires sacrifice, correct? At the very least, it's relational. And hopefully we've made a compelling argument that authentic relationship is inherently selfless.
You see, my beef with love is not the word in of itself, but culture's understanding and use of it. Google it. Stop this video and Google definition of love. Figurative garbage. Feel a deep romantic and sexual attachment to someone? Are you serious? Like maybe desire or infatuation, but not love. When you tell your husband in his 60s, I love you, you think that's from a deep romantic or sexual attachment? What does a deep romantic attachment even mean? I don't know. But this is the problem, right? Western culture worships the brand of this word, while at the same time giving it a plethora of vastly different meanings.
Did you know that both Greek and Hebrew have 3 distinctly different words for what we would describe as love? It's been said that Sanskrit has 96 different words that we would have to do the disservice of trying to fit into our one little word. And we put this word everywhere, in our kitchens, on our bumper stickers, on our butts. We've made it soft and amorphous, packed it with positivity, but it's supposed to still hold all of this weight when a couple declares it to each other for the first time. But let's take a closer look at that. Because it's my assertion that our use of and understanding of the word love It's intertwined with our commitment to each other. We tell the people that we're most close to that we love them, our best friends, our brothers, sisters, spouses. But what's interesting is when you tell your mom you love her, you're not describing the electricity you feel when you kiss your boyfriend or girlfriend for the first time. You might mistake that electricity for love, but that electricity doesn't describe any sacrifice or relationship. You barely know her. It's ego. It's a reaction to the thought that this girl actually likes me.
My conclusion is that you are saying one of two things. So as we've discussed, deep relationships are made up of two people who agree to stick with each other. And in that agreement, you are creating safety to be vulnerable, honest, and broken. And when you say, I love you, you are making that promise. A promise to stay, a promise to accept, and a promise to make it through the hard times.
Take the young couple, for instance. The first time they say I love you is typically considered a milestone. But if that's nothing more than the declaration of a feeling, then there are no further implications than, great, I'm glad your brain juices worked in such a way that gave you that feeling. But it's not just a feeling. There are larger implications of safety and comfort and vulnerability to be open with each other. Love is active, and the feeling you get is symptomatic of that action. It's a feeling of safety and comfort that you feel because of a promise to trust, a promise to commit, and a promise to understand.
AKA a promise to love. I say this because if it's true that why we like a story, the thing that compels us to keep watching, is character change through relationship, love, then that makes every good story a love story. If we're not on the same page as writers and our definition of love is not clear, then we will write stories based on the commercialized understanding of love, which unsurprisingly is entirely superficial. You see, the reason I changed the name of this video is because love is everything we've talked about in the entire series. As I'm sure you've noticed, trust, understanding, and commitment cross over in ways that make it hard to isolate each of them, because they're all expressions of love. Love is the mechanic of together. As we discussed in our intro video, we are relational. It's intertwined with our meaning. But because who we tend to be is selfish, we need something that's going to change us for the sake of another. And that would be love.
And so, when building characters and who they will become, create loving relationships filled with trust and understanding, built on commitment through promises and acts of service, in order to challenge who they tend to be, so that ultimately they'll become something greater.
And as a final send-off, since I'm sure all of you aren't sick of our psycho-philosophical mumbo-jumbo, life is inherently hard. We are all broken and in progress. If I think I don't need to change, and no one is challenging that, I'm still in my first act. It's far too easy to distract ourselves with superficial MacGuffins or numbing life's realities with internet, Netflix, video games, alcohol, etc. Simply put, if the identity of your life, where you spend your most time, your character motivation, is comparative, i.e. success, power, influence, admiration, achievement, knowledge, wealth, just needing to show people that you're not a failure. If that is your greatest concern, your life will feel hollow and void of any impact or meaning. But if the identity of your life, your ultimate concern, is relational, serving and valuing others more than yourself, you will find rich, intimate, character-changing relationships that will fill you with direction, emotional impact, and, in my findings, half of your purpose.